Hello, welcome. My name is Cameron. I'm one of the pastors here at Crosspoint. Good to be here with you guys, worshiping, singing Christmas songs out in worship. Ton of fun. Hey, before we get started, I've kind of snuck in a little sneaky announcement. So when you're preaching, you get to do that if you want to. Hey, we are starting something. You've maybe heard me mention this before. I just wanted to give a quick couple minutes to explain kind of what this is and ask for any help, or if anyone's interested in being involved, to reach out to me. So we are going to be starting something at Crosspoint called Celebrate Recovery. I'm just curious, has anyone ever heard of this before? Okay, like I had heard the name a little bit before, but I didn't really know a lot about what it was until doing some research and kind of getting involved in starting this process. It is a step-based recovery group. So think of like 12 steps with Alcoholics Anonymous. There's the 12 steps, kind of like step-based, these things you go through. But it's been completely like rebuilt to make Jesus the center of it. So like AA uses a lot of like higher power and God language. But this Celebrate Recovery specifically names like Jesus as the higher power and the one that we're following and the one that we're being transformed by. And another thing I did not exactly know is that it is for so many more things than just like alcoholism or drug abuse. So the language they use is like hurts, habits, and hangups. So some of the things kind of from the program are like if you struggle with anger, codependency, food issues, chemical dependencies, so like drug addiction, alcoholism, gambling addiction, childhood dysfunction, grief, mental health. Like there's a whole lot more. If you go to their website, you can kind of check out all the things that it's for. So anything that you're feeling like you have these hurts, habits, hangups, these things that you're just not like dealing with or finding freedom from in your life. One of the things I've loved, been involved in now a couple things, just kind of seeing like what it's like, is there's a huge emphasis on owning where you really are and reality and what's really going on in your life, bringing issues out into the light and being open to God's healing power. So like, it's been so cool to like go into a room, have someone be like, hey, I really struggle with alcoholism and anger, and here's the way I got angry this week, and here's the way like God is transforming me and convicting me. And so many of our issues and our problems and these repetitive patterns in our life, we like to keep secret, and we like to hide, and we like to pretend like we're not there, like they're not there. There's one phrase in like a quote from AA for recovery stuff. You're only as sick as your secrets. And as much as you like keep those things secret and push them down and try to ignore them, they have way more power over your life than if you just open them up and bring them out into the light and allow God to speak to them and to heal them. So if you are tired, if you have things you're like, yes, I'm tired of pushing that down, or I'm kind of curious about what this would be like. If you are interested at all, or you know someone who's interested in maybe being a part of a group like this, it's not like you sign up and now you're committed for the next 5 years. It's like you can come and check it out. I would love it if you would email me. So as we're getting like a launch date, I can just keep you in the loop. I'm sure we'll announce it here too on Sunday mornings, but just to kind of keep you in the loop about what's going on. But also kind of our main hang up right now to getting started is we need a couple more leaders. So if you have some recovery experience, does not have to be Celebrate Recovery, does not have to be alcoholism, but some sort of recovery experience and would be interested in maybe having a conversation about what being a leader for something like this would be like, please also reach out to me. We're hoping to start sometime in the first half of the new year, like to, kind of get our leadership team assembled and kind of going through stuff and getting ready to launch. I think it'd be a huge benefit, not just for our church, but for our community to have a Jesus-centered place for people to come and like bring their issues out into the open and allow God to start bringing healing to them. So really excited. If you're interested at all, email me. It's just Cameron@crosspointwi.com, or if you go to the website, you can find my stuff there. So, sound good? Awesome. All right, we are going to get started. We are talking about the phrase mighty God today from this phrases in Isaiah. These things get attached to Jesus. But I wanted to first share that one of my favorite movies in the entire world is Braveheart. Are there any other Braveheart lovers out there? Yes. Now, I will say this, don't go home and watch it with your kids because Cameron said it was a good movie, kids. Let's watch Braveheart. You might want to check that out first. One of the things I love about it is here's this guy, well, it's set in Scotland, so it's just like beautiful and the music and all of those things. But here's this guy, he's like reluctant to get into the fight, but he gets kind of dragged in and ends up just like kicking butt and like leading a whole rebellion and leading this group to fight off injustice. He's like this hero that comes in and just like takes over and takes charge and like has a huge impact on all the things that are happening at this time. And we love stories about heroes. Like as people, we are drawn to stories like this, whether it's superheroes, like the whole Marvel craze happening right now, whether it's like an action movie, a spy thriller, a war movie, whatever it is, even movies that don't involve violence, like a courtroom drama or whatever, they often involve someone making heroic choices and taking like big courageous steps and doing big things and having a big splash and big waves on the world around them. Like going against the odds and accomplishing something great. This is something that we gravitate to as people, these heroic figures. And while the Bible, back in the Bible times, in the Old Testament times, they didn't have movies, obviously. It was a very oral culture, and they would spend a lot of time sitting around campfires or while they're waiting for something, telling stories to each other and recounting the stories of Israel's history and probably telling lots of other stories as well. And one word that I think probably came up a lot, that we see a lot in the Bible, it's a Hebrew word called Gibor, and it means like a mighty hero, a strong military hero. It's used to describe a guy named Nimrod in the Bible, who we don't actually know a lot about. He's like a mighty hunter before the Lord, though I imagine they had like lots of tales and myths and legends about him that they would tell. It's also used to describe David's fighting men. He had like this group of people that were kind of like his warrior friends, bodyguards that went around and did all these great military like feats in Israel's history. And it's used a ton of other times throughout the Bible to talk about heroic deeds, to talk about people coming in and fighting and warriors. Now, that's how it's used mostly in the Bible, and especially before the book of Isaiah, it's used almost exclusively to refer to warrior heroes, these militaristic heroes, someone good at fighting. But it's also used in our passage today to describe God. Okay, but before we get there, just a little refresher, or if you weren't here last week, we are looking at these passages in the book of Isaiah that are called like messianic prophecies. Okay, messianic just means having to do with the Messiah. The Messiah was this idea in Jewish thought that God was going to like bring this anointed one, this chosen one who's going to come and was going to redeem Israel and was going to like be God's saving agent in the nation. So this Messiah that was going to come, that God was going to use. And then prophecy, Mac talked a lot about it last week. So if you did not get a chance to listen or you were not here last week, I would definitely encourage you to go check that out because a huge chunk of the Bible is prophecy. And he did a really good job explaining what exactly that means because it's not just like getting a crystal ball out and trying to predict the future. Like there's a whole lot more to it than that. But we're looking at these messianic prophecies, so these texts that are saying something about the Messiah. And one of the things we talked about last week is that a lot of these passages have something to do with like what's going on the moment they were written, but also then are picked up and these themes are like pulled out and looked at for something in the future. So, for example, Mac used the example of like Jesus's bones being broken and how it's like, oh, and this is to fulfill this passage. And you go back and look and it's about like the Passover lamb, this whole thing, if you're remembering this. And it's like the point isn't, hey, this was predicting that Jesus's bones weren't going to be broken. The point is it's drawing a connection between like Jesus being the Passover lamb, the one who, was there, who saves us and rescues us and redeems us. So, all of that to say, when we look at these prophecies about Jesus being the Messiah, there's like usually some sort of historical thing, but then also some sort of future looking, and this is what this chosen one is going to be. And the way I was trying to think about this, like what's a good way to think about how this works in the Bible? And I was thinking of like, if you ever have to teach someone to walk, or if you were ever taught to walk, your parents might say, okay, you need to put one foot in front of the other, right? You're kind of holding the hands and letting them hobble and do their thing. And that's a very real concrete thing that you need to do. Put one foot in front of the other. But you can also take that, and that's also a great piece of life advice. Right, this is how life works. You need to kind of put one foot in front of the other. You keep stepping forward, keep moving forward. And in the same way, a lot of these passages in the Old Testament that refer to Jesus or point to Jesus or would look back and are like, this connects to Jesus, is like it had something to do with history, but then it's also something bigger as well. And that is what our passage in Isaiah is it probably had some sort of historical reference point, but then they also started to attach all this meaning, messianic meaning to it. Like God is going to do something huge, and this is what it's going to look like. Now, in the context of Isaiah, if you read Isaiah 1 through 8, we're going to be in Isaiah chapter 9. 1 through 8 is all about how God is bringing judgment and how the nations are closing in around the Israelites and oh man, they're outnumbered, don't know what they're going to do. And then here's what we have in Isaiah chapter 9, verses 6 through 7. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. So that's our phrase, is that one, mighty God. And this is where that word Gibor comes in, that was used to describe military heroes throughout the Bible and Israel's history. And as we look at this, it's less of a description and more of a title or a name. That's why in this translation, mighty is capitalized, because it's not just describing that God is mighty. It's a title, the mighty God. And one of the things that this prophecy, this section of prophecy shows us about the Messiah, because clearly there is a lot of future type things happening in this passage, right? Of the greatness of his government and peace, there will be no end from that time on and forever. There's this kind of idea that this is something it probably has to do with now, but it's also really looking towards this future hope when God is going to rule and reign over everything forever. And what we see is this Messiah is also not only just going to be a strong person, but is also going to be the mighty God. That the Messiah will have some sort of divinity or godness about them when they come and do what they are going to do, which is one of the reasons why we could see this as predictive. Now, there are a lot of ways, if you were to read your Bible, that that God can be described as strong, or we'll see the Lord Almighty, or with a strong arm, all these kinds of phrases. But this word being used, I think, is so fascinating because it's very unique to be used to describe God, to describe anyone other than a military warrior. But when I think about it, it makes sense, right? Israel they're being surrounded, they're being on all sides, people are closing in around them. And so a warrior coming in to fight off their enemies would feel very appealing and hopeful to them. And I try to put myself in the context of the stories as they're happening. And it'd be kind of if after 9/11, we know the right answer is to love our enemies. Right, but we would probably also wanted God to come in and just take out the people who are doing evil and violence in the world and destroy them, right? Beat them into submission. This is what we would want God to do. And that would be where that word Gibor comes in. But the problem here, which maybe you've noticed, is that this doesn't, a mighty warrior who comes and fights and kicks butt Braveheart style, is not really the picture of Jesus that we have, right? We know Jesus is the Messiah, this chosen one, this one who is going to overflow all of these passages that we're reading, but this does not sound at all like Jesus, right? Jesus, in some ways, feels like the opposite of that, right? Jesus, instead of feeling oh wow, he's strong and people are afraid of him and he's going around fighting people. Like Jesus seems kind of weak when you read the Gospels, right? You look at his birth, which we celebrate around Christmas time. He comes and he's born and he's vulnerable and he just comes as like a little baby in a nowhere town, and like all sorts of bad things could happen to him. His life is spent as a carpenter. Nothing against any of you carpenters out there. But his life is spent just kind of doing normal things, like working a normal job. He treated everyone with respect, even the people that no one else treated with respect, right? He was gentle, he was loving, he was forgiving, he was peaceful. Like he called the little children to him. Like there was a gentleness to Jesus. He didn't fight the Romans, who were the people occupying Israel at the time, right? Like who would be like Israel's kind of like main enemy at the time Jesus was alive. He didn't fight them. In fact, sometimes he healed their family members, right? Jesus was not interested in fighting the Romans. He went peacefully when he was arrested, right? Which you would think would be the ultimate moment that, okay, everything's coming to a head and he's finally gonna like fight back, and he doesn't. He just goes peacefully. He doesn't even really defend himself that much at his trial. He actually taught against violence, if you read Jesus's teachings. When Peter, like there's a scene or this part of Jesus's life where Jesus is being arrested and Peter comes in and he cuts off the ear of like the high priest's like assistant. And Jesus rebukes Peter for fighting back, actually. So not only is he like, hey, I'm not gonna fight back, he doesn't want anyone else to fight back on his behalf. And in his death, he goes willingly to death. He doesn't call down like the strength of angels and like angelic beings that could rescue him and like take him away. And he just like sits up there on the cross and dies. And what we see in Jesus is he didn't defeat death and sin by like with a sword and by like destroying his enemies, but by humbling himself. And so as I was thinking about this passage in Isaiah, it's like there is a huge gap here between what like this phrase, like what the connotations of this phrase in Isaiah and what we see in the life of Jesus. Like how do these even make sense with each other? Like this just feels totally different. And so one of the things that I started to look into was, okay, how is this word used after Isaiah but before Jesus? And it led me to the book of Zephaniah, which is a really little weird, like 3-chapter book. The first time someone told me to turn to Zephaniah, I kind of thought they were pranking me because I'd never heard of it before. But it's a real book. It's in the Bible. It's only 3 chapters. So I thought, okay, 3 chapters, like I should just read this whole thing because the word mighty comes in, or this word Gabor comes in chapter 3. I was like, oh, that's not too bad. I'll just read the whole thing. And I was in for a little bit of a surprise. So Zephaniah, it's been a while since I'd read it. Verse 2 starts off, I will sweep away everything from the face of the earth, declares the Lord. Verse 18, he's talking about people God's gonna judge. Neither their silver nor their gold will be able to save them on the day of the Lord's wrath. In the fire of his jealousy, the whole earth will be consumed, for he will make a sudden end of all who live on the earth. Merry Christmas. There's actually a few that I skipped that I thought maybe would be too graphic for kids in the audience. So if you're interested, go back and read Zephaniah. So I keep reading, and there's like more of these like judgment and wrath. I'm gonna judge these people, and then I'm gonna judge these people. Then we get to chapter 3, verse 8. He says, therefore, wait for me, declares the Lord. For the day I will stand up to testify, I have decided to assemble the nations, like all the nations, to gather the kingdoms of the earth and to pour out my wrath on them. All my fierce anger. The whole world will be consumed by the fire of my jealous anger. So I'm like, okay, I'm still not really seeing the connection here, but we'll keep reading. He's gonna bring all the kingdoms of the world and he's gonna be consumed with the fire of God's anger. And then the very next 2 verses I read, it started to like click for me. Chapter 3, verses 9 through 10. Then I will purify the lips of the peoples, that all of them may call on the name of the Lord and serve him shoulder to shoulder. From beyond the rivers of Cush, so like far away, like the furthest reaches of the earth, my worshipers, my scattered people will bring me offerings. So this whole book is like talking about wrath and judgment and fire and anger. And what we see in this verse is God's wrath and his anger and his fire is not just meant to like destroy people, but is meant to purify them. right? And for the purpose of bringing nations from all over the earth into relationship with God. He's not destroying just them, he's destroying the sin and the injustice that exists in the world so that they might be reconciled and be able to worship and serve the Lord. People from all nations, right, which at this time would be a pretty radical thing to say when it's so like focused on like, here, our nation is the most important. We're God's chosen people. Here, God's saying like, I will bring all peoples into my presence, and through my wrath and anger and fire, purify them so that all peoples of the earth can serve me and worship me and be in relationship with me. Which, by the way, this is a great example of why it's not good to take just rip Bible verses out of context. Because some of those early ones sound like, wow, there's a lot, but you need the whole context of a book sometimes to know exactly what's going on. Then we get to chapter 3, verse 17, which is one of the more popular verses in Zephaniah, so you've maybe heard before, but this is where our word Gabor comes back, kind of pops up again. The Lord your God is with you. Remember, this is in the context of him purifying everyone in order to save them. The mighty warrior who saves. He will take great delight in you. In his love, he will no longer rebuke you, but will rejoice over you with singing. Which I love this picture that here is God, the strongest thing in the whole world, strongest being in the whole world, will use his strength to purify people and redeem them so that they might be in relationship with him, right? And that is exactly what we see in Jesus. That he did not use his strength and his power and all the like angelic beings he could have called down to like fight off the Romans or destroy people, but instead he fought against the powers of sin and death and darkness and the enemy so that people would not be held in bondage anymore and we'd be able to be redeemed and like brought back, restored back into relationship with God. All these things that were holding people captive, Jesus enters the grave, and that is who he fights, is the power of the enemy and sin and death. Not all these people that are in bondage to the enemy and to sin and to death. So that's our bottom line for today as we look at what this phrase says about Jesus. Is that Jesus uses his might and power to fight against sin and to rescue or redeem people. Just like in Zephaniah and other parts of the Old Testament, Jesus doesn't see the people fighting against him as the enemies. He knows there's a real enemy that needs to be defeated. And that's what he's going to use his strength and his power and his might to do, is to redeem and free people from captivity. And to me, when I think about this is hugely relevant for us today in our world, because we live in a world where we are encouraged to use our strength and our power and our influence to fight against other people or to fight for ourselves, right? We live in a world that is so divided. Like pretty much anything you can figure out, like people are divided, whether it's politically, whether it's countries, like whatever it might be, people are divided. What Christmas movie they like, right? There's division everywhere. Our world is divided and we are like being manipulated, not to be like all crazy conspiracy theory guy, but we are being manipulated to see other people in the world as enemies. And as people that are not deserving of love and grace and compassion, but are like the enemy, when really there's only one enemy in our world, and that is none of you and none of the people in our world. But we are being like trained to see other people as enemies, people who vote differently than us, people who look different than us, people who come from a different country as like, oh, they're the problem with this world. They're the problem with our country. They're the problem in our town. And so much so that people can't even, like as I watch the news and things, it's like people cannot even agree to come together and fight against things that are unjust in our world because there's so much polarization and so much like, okay, they're the enemy, so we can't work with them and we need to stay on our separate sides of issues and all of those things because we're gonna be polarized and triggered, or we don't want like my voters to get mad or whatever. Or you're like me and you see all that and you just kind of like disengage from everything. It's like, well, like I don't want to get involved in all that contentious fighting and politics and all of those things. But the thing is, Jesus was not disengaged, right? Jesus was engaged. He used his strength to fight against injustice. He wasn't afraid to speak up when things were wrong in the world around him. He wasn't afraid to do things that even made him look bad in order to bring healing and restoration to the people around him. And he was also full of love for the people around him, even when he needed to speak hard truths to them. No matter what, and the people living in this world, I think Jesus models this so well for us, that the people around us are not our enemies. There is a bigger enemy at work. No matter what values they have, no matter what they believe, no matter what pronouns they use, no one around us is our enemy. And God is actually fighting and using his power and strength to try to bring people into relationship with him. Like, that is what he cares about more than anything else. So I think one implication of this is that we need to be, as like followers of Jesus, less worried about the optics of who we might be associated with and whether or not they're on our team or not our team, and be more concerned with, like Jesus did and like we see God did in like the book of Zephaniah, using power and strength in order to redeem people and fight against injustice and fight against the power of sin at work in our world. Because Jesus, he does not neatly fit into either political party. We've talked a lot about this, that Jesus does not kind of neatly fit. And so sometimes kingdom issues are gonna make you link arms with people who agree with you on most things, with your values, with how you would vote, all those things. But sometimes when God prompts us to be a part of a kingdom issue, we're gonna have to link arms with people we don't agree with, or people whose values are not fully synced up with us, or people who don't fully align with us on everything. And that is okay, right? Because the people around us are not our enemies. Sin and darkness is the enemy, and God wants to bring everyone in the whole world into relationship with them. It'd be like if you were driving and you see a car crash, and you're like, oh no, what's happening? I need to go help. Someone else did, and you're like jogging up. You're like, hey, who'd you vote for in 2020? Just gotta make sure we can work together on this. Like, that's insane, right? Like, why would we do that? And yet we do that same thing in so many other ways. Like, oh, if you don't agree with every little thing I agree with, then I can't work with you. Yes, there's some wisdom about who we associate with. All of those things are true. But God has called us to use our power and our strength, not to build up our own kingdom, not to fight against worldly enemies, but to fight against the power of sin and death and the injustice that exists in our world. And what I have found is when I do that, when I am getting involved with people who are not followers of Jesus, whose values are vastly different than mine, like, I don't like compromise my values. Sure, sometimes I grow and I like, oh, I didn't think about it that way, or I learn and whatever. But what more often than not happens is there's opportunities to then share the gospel of Jesus with people. They say, oh, I'm kind of surprised to see a Christian here at this thing. Oh, why is that? I don't know. I think of Christians as pretty judgmental. Well, that's not how Jesus, and there's like a conversation that opens up there and a way to proclaim the gospel. And and we miss out on that when we just stay in our own little groups where everyone looks and votes and thinks alike because we're too afraid of like getting involved or linking arms with people where the optics might look bad. But no one on earth is our enemy. Like, there are bigger enemies at work, and we need to be a part of the work God is doing no matter who that might cause us to rub shoulders with. Like in that verse in Zephaniah, there are people rubbing shoulders to be in relationship with God that have hugely different cultures, hugely different values, but God doesn't care. He's bringing them all to himself. So there's an invitation, I think, for us, and I'm kind of talking about like really big things, like these big picture injustices in the world. And I think for a lot of us, God is inviting us to maybe be more engaged in those in a healthier way. But this is also true in like the really small day-to-day, week-to-week areas of our life, where God is calling us to lay down our power and our strength and our might, and not just use it for ourselves or to build up our own little kingdom or to fight against other people, but to use that power and strength and might to love the people around us. And we all have some level of power and influence. Maybe you like all the way from like you own a company and have all these employees that you have influence over. Maybe you just manage a few people at your work. Maybe you're connected with people at work or school or on social media. Maybe you're a parent, a grandparent, an uncle, an aunt, whatever. Even if you just have like one or two like really close relationships in your life, like you still have power and influence over how those people experience the world by how you choose to treat them. And there's an invitation here in all areas of our life to lay down our power and our strength and not just use it for ourselves and for our own sake, but for the sake of others around us and for what's best for them. So the way Jesus fulfills this passage is he shows us that our job isn't to use power for ourselves, but for the sake of others and be a part of lifting other people up and extending God's kingdom in the day-to-day, week-to-week parts of our life. And it requires little choices and sacrifices daily that you have to make in order to do that. Moments where you have to choose service over comfort, where you have to choose what's best for people, where you have to like put your phone down maybe and be present with people and be for them, where you have to speak truth even when it's difficult and you don't think it's gonna go very well, right? These are the moments where we choose to like live into this thing Jesus is modeling, where we lay down our own power and might and strength, and instead of using it for ourselves, use that for the sake of other people. So here's a couple questions, a question I'd love for you to think about and sit with this week. Where is God inviting you to use your might for the sake of others? Again, it might be something big. Maybe there's this big cause that like God has like pulled on your heart and you're like over and over, you're like, oh, I think God wants me to be involved in this, but you keep putting it off. Maybe it's like a really small way, like the way you're parenting your kids or the way you're interacting with a friend or, the way you're treating people around you. And then, because I know Christmas season is very busy, I think it's really helpful, sometimes I can be this way, where I think like, okay, here's what I think God's calling me to do. And I come up with this like big elaborate plan of what it would look like to respond to what God's calling me to do. And it's so like time consuming that it just never happens. So identify like a 10-minute step you could take towards that this week. Like something you can do in 10 minutes. And what I have found is when I break it down into really small steps, like what God's calling me to do, break it down into a small step, it helps me then like get more and more and more of those steps to actually start moving in that direction instead of being so overwhelmed that like I just don't do anything about it at all. I don't know if anyone can relate to that or not. Let me pray for us and then I'll send you out to go about using your strength and your power and your might for the sake of other people this week. God, thank you for this day. We thank you that you give such a great example of what it looks like to live in a kingdom way. And so God, I ask that you would help us to, one, recognize all the ways that we have power and strength and influence in our world around us. And God, that you would give us the courage to lay those down and stop fighting for ourselves and start fighting for the things that you care about and the things that you want us engaged in and involved in, the way you want us using our strength and our power. So God, we just ask that you would give us kingdom lenses this week to see the whole world as loved people created by you that you want to be in relationship with, and that you would just start to deprogram some of that enemy making that has happened in our world through social media and news and all those other things. God, help deprogram those things so we might see people the way that you see them. In your name we pray, amen. All right, have a good week.